University. We just finished up our 83rd annual Bible lectureship Thursday night late. It started last Sunday afternoon and finished up Thursday night about 10:30 at night. And we had record crowds, the most that we've ever had on record. We're close to 3,000 guests in attendance, and that's along with our students in addition to that. And then we have about 3,000 to 4,000 individuals to join us online in addition to that. And so it's really amazing to think that 7,000 or 8,000 people heard many lessons of the proclaiming of God's Word this year out of Exodus, the God of liberation, liberating us, and also talking about the covenant that God makes with His people. And it was a tremendous time. And I tell you all that to say this: you, as the Waterview congregation, were very generous supporters financially of our lectureship. That lectureship to put on of that magnitude cost about $85,000. And so churches across America join in and help with that. And I just want to give you that quick of a report to say thank you for your support, and much, much good was done with what was invested. Thank you very much. Any time that we can visit about Freed Hardeman, I'd love to do that, but that's not what we're here for right now. Although there's a lot of things running through my mind I'd love to say, but let's jump right in to thinking about commitment. You know, it wasn't that many decades ago that if you went to college and you moved in with your roommate or maybe some people down the hall or even suite mates, and you know, when you first move in, that first day and that first night and the next day, there's a lot of conversations to get to know each other. And you know, one of the regular things back a few decades ago was, what do your parents do for a living? What do you think now is kind of taking the place of that? What's a regular question that sometime, it won't be the lead question, but sometime that night or sometime the next day or sometime that week, it's kind of taking the place of that. And it'll go something like this: are your parents still together? Or it might even be surprised if you say something that your parents are still together. It may be, your mom and dad, they're still married? Really? What's that like? Do you realize that more children today are brought home from the hospital without a father and a mother that are married to each other than are? We have crossed a line in America that we haven't lived it long enough to see what the effect is going to be. But now we have more children growing up without their father continually in their life than with their father. In other words, now we've hit the tipping point. We know what America looks like for a lot of generations when mothers and fathers both were active in lives, but we don't know what it looks like when more in America will not have that continual father influence. How do we right that ship, and how does that work? Well, some way we've got to get back to the simple, sometimes very difficult proposition that says, husbands and wives need to get married and make a commitment that is lifelong. A commitment that says to God and to the spouse, through the valleys and the mountain peaks, we're in this together till death parts us. Isn't it amazing that in America now, if you were going to describe marriages and wedding days and marriages and be just bluntly honest, you'd have to say that many times a full 12 months of intense research about wedding days and pinning 1,000 things on Pinterest and reading books and articles about wedding days and thousands upon thousands of dollars. I've been through 3 weddings in my family in the last 5 years. I know what I'm talking about. Thousands of dollars. You know, a cheap wedding now is $10,000, and kind of more like a normal is more like $20,000 to $25,000, and a lot of weddings are $30,000 and $35,000, and that's not quite in the elaborate range yet. And so we have all of this research about the wedding day. And many of those couples that get married on that day have given hardly any time and attention, energy, money, or research to what it takes to have a good marriage. isn't a shame to think that more attention is given to the day than to the marriage. You know, a few years ago, USA Today ran an article, and the title of it was, "Vows Take on a New Life." And the article talked about how more people today are not, even on their wedding day, thinking about a lifelong commitment. And the article in USA Today, not a Christian publication, in USA Today talked about that one of the lines that's intentionally removed from a lot of ceremonies today is the line that says, "Till death parts us." And they said some are choosing to put instead, "For as long as our love shall last." That's pretty convenient, isn't it? And "until our time is over." That's pretty straightforward, isn't it? I commit to you to be a good spouse until I'm not. And when it's over, it's over. And we'll just enjoy the ride that we have. And listen, if we're just talking about a jacket we like, if we're talking about a car that we like, you know, I've had a car long enough. I'm ready for a truck now. Listen, there are so many things in life. It is fine for us to say, "I'm good with that until it's over." But let us as God's children never forget that what God has offered us in marriage, that's absolutely wonderful, it's profound, it has an impact upon our life, on our marriages, upon our families, upon our churches, upon our communities, and upon our eternal life. And that is that marriage is a commitment by God's design for life. It's a beautiful commitment. And so would God give us a love story, Song of Solomon, 8 chapters long, where from the first verse to the last verse, it's all about a love story between a man and a woman. Would He give us that love story and not include at least some paragraph about the beauty of commitment? Of course He would. And so we have some lines in here that when we first read them, I don't know if you'll think, "Wow, those are beautiful and powerful." But yet, when we really understand what they mean, I can't hardly help now, but if I'm writing a note to a newly married couple, I usually make a reference about Song of Solomon, the 8th chapter, and I mention these verses because when we really understand what they're saying, they're absolutely beautiful, beautiful verses about commitment. In the 8th chapter, let's start reading in verse 5. And the really strong words of commitment will come in verse 6, but let's put them in a little bit of order. And by this time, if you were here in Bible class, I mentioned this, so I'll quickly mention it now. The outline of Song of Solomon begins with their attraction to each other. Then they begin to spend time with each other. They like each other. Their love for each other deepens. And then they start talking about us instead of individuals. Now they see themselves being together. And so then they have a wedding at the end of the 3rd chapter. They have a honeymoon in the 4th chapter. They have a good fight right after the honeymoon. They have conflict and resolution in the 5th and 6th chapter. And then we see more romance in the 7th chapter. And then we come to the 8th chapter, and we have this segment here of great commitment that they espouse to each other. And so leading into these words of commitment, we see a scene of commitment. And remember, Song of Solomon's written in poetry, so there's symbolism and there's culture that has to be understood. And when we bring that all together, it really becomes a very powerful story. And so we're going to see some symbolism here, and hopefully we can appreciate this. In the 8th chapter, verse 5, imagine you're looking at a distance off to a couple that they have been out spending time together. They're healing from their conflict they've had. They've had this wonderful time of romance. And then they're walking back, if you will, and someone's seeing them walk back. And notice the symbolism here in 5. Who is this coming up from the wilderness, leaning upon her beloved? Now, what do we see there? Imagine being at such a far distance that you say, who is this? Oh, but then you realize, oh, it's not one person. It's two, but they were walking so close to each other, and she was leaning upon him as they were walking, that we have the symbolism there of, oh, now I realize it's not one person. Now I realize it's two. All of you know a couple that you can't hardly say their name without the other one's name, right? They're just inseparable, at least in their approach to life and the way they interact and the way they live life. You know, when Tracy and I were newlyweds. There was a couple at church that had been married, I guess, close to 60 years. Both of them were kind of shorter people, and he had this very striking white hair that was combed back. They almost looked like movie stars, but they didn't try to, you know. And she was this little petite blonde, and they always were so happy, and you just loved them so much. You just wanted to hug them every time you saw them, and you couldn't say one name without the other. Melvin and Marie. Melvin and Marie. And I remember one time, I remember being in the foyer of the church building. It was several minutes before Bible class was going to begin, and very few people had arrived. And anyone that was in the foyer at that time, which there were only a few of us, and I was just standing alone at that moment. And I looked around, and I looked through the big glass windows there in the foyer, and I saw them getting out of their car. And I saw him go around and open the door for her. And then I saw them start walking up the sidewalk, hand in hand. And they were laughing and smiling. It was just another day for them. It was the way they lived an inseparable life throughout their life. And I remember that very moment, watching the entire scene and saying to myself, that's what I want. I want Tracy and I to be able to be decades down the road and still have that kind of inseparable life. You know, I haven't told anybody this, but I'll tell you guys this. The other day, someone said to Tracy and I, said, have you seen the post that one of the students at Freed Hardeman posted about you guys? I said, no. They said, I'm going to forward it to you. And the girl had been walking behind us across campus, and she took a picture of Tracy and I from behind walking across campus. And we were holding hands. And all she put on the post was ... goals ... And you know why that warmed my heart, right? I wasn't but just a few years older than that young lady when I saw that Christian, godly couple show me what it looks like to live an inseparable life. All we're talking about is people that when they say their vows, they mean it. Like every day. They say their vows and they live them every day. And so I remind all of you that have been married a few years, the younger ones of us, we're watching and we're learning. Oh, we know what God's Word says, but it's so much easier for us to read and see and learn than just to read. And how powerful it is for us to see your godly examples. And how powerful it is for the young people to see those that even are not as old, see your example to say, that's a goal in my life also. Now, she goes on to talk about, or the relative goes on, speaking here, the rest of verse 5. I awakened you under the apple tree. There your mother brought you forth. There she who bore you brought you forth. It's really hard to know exactly what the symbolism is there. When you study back earlier in Song of Solomon, in the 2nd chapter, she talked about him being my apple tree, and she talked about finding, it was the idea, the symbolism is the idea that she will find shade from the sun underneath her apple tree, and that means a lot because in the 1st chapter, it was her being exposed to the sun that had darkened her skin that really made her self-conscious about the way she looked. And so she realized, remember, an apple tree, of course, also bears fruit. So there's a lot of symbolism to say, hey, you're the one that protects me. You're the one that has made my life more fruitful. In other words, I'm better with you in my life than I am without you in my life. And then also there seems to be a little bit where there's a birth spoken about here, that maybe the symbolism here is not only is this one that is good for me is in my life, but it may just very well be the fact that we are receiving God's blessing through each other. The idea of, what if it's God that brought us together? I've prayed, my parents prayed for a lot of years for me to have a godly spouse. She's prayed. Her parents prayed for a lot of years. Do we not think God's going to answer that prayer? And so what's important in that is that we see God's hand in it. And then in that we even see it's important that we're the right kind. Is God going to give us the wrong kind of person if He's answering the prayer? No. And so we see this idea of God helping us find that individual because we are the right kind, they are the right kind, and then we live our life doing what? Being the right kind of person. I want to read for you a line out of from Zig Ziglar. He talked about courtship after marriage. And he said, I have no way of knowing whether or not you married the wrong person. But I do know that many people have a lot of wrong ideas about marriage and what it takes to make that marriage happy and successful. I'll be the first to admit that it's possible that you did marry the wrong person. However, if you treat the wrong person like the right person, you could well end up having married the right person after all. On the other hand, if you marry the right person and you treat that person wrong, you certainly will have ended up marrying the wrong person. I also know that it is far more important to be the right kind of person than it is to marry the right person. In short, whether you married the right or wrong person, it's primarily up to you. That is the sobering reality, isn't it? In marriage, that the challenge of marriage is it's made up of two people and you can only control one of them. The reality is you only have the responsibility for one of them. And so when we think about, did God bring me and my spouse together? That's a good thought. It really is. And it's worth time and meditation and prayer. But what I would suggest to you that especially what we are responsible for every moment is, am I the right kind of husband or the right kind of wife? Would God look down and say, well done. You're really being a great reflection of Jesus Christ in your family. Whenever the husband and wife both can be the right kind, you tend to see those people that are inseparable. Those people that you just see them walk through life together, being a powerhouse of influence, not because they're trying to be, really just because they're trying to walk with the Lord, and He's blessed their journey. But let's read on. Look, if you will, in verse 6. Set me as a seal. Now this is where the commitment language gets really strong. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm. For love is as strong as death, jealousy as cruel as the grave. Its flames are flames of fire, a most vehement flame. Possessiveness. First, he spoke of being inseparable. But next, he spoke of taking hold and saying, I own this. I won't let go. I'm on this journey with you. Good or bad. As a matter of fact, notice that last part of the verse, he spoke about love, and he spoke about jealousy. You know, sometimes, and oftentimes, jealousy is very negative. But you realize there's other times in the Bible that jealousy is very positive as it is mentioned. As a matter of fact, you remember, it even says, God is a jealous God. That's a compliment. In other words, God is saying, when I make a covenant with you, I am so committed to keeping that covenant, I will not voluntarily allow anything to destroy that. And so I'm jealous toward you. I don't want anybody or anything coming in between me and you and destroying the covenant that we have with each other. I'm jealous in that way that I want to honor that commitment that we've made. God is a jealous God in the best of ways. And here in God's love story of a man and a woman, He mentions that jealousy for the man and woman. And He says, I want you to have love that is possessive. I want you to have jealousy that's possessive. Now, we all know that you can take that jealousy and it become, even in marriage, a very destructive sinful behavior. We're not talking about that. We're talking about the healthy jealousy that says, I am committed and I don't want anybody or anything coming between our relationship. I'm jealous in that type of way. And then to drive it home, he brings out a few things that are very permanent. He says, it's like death. It's like the grave. It's like fire. You don't go into death and then say, change my mind. Can we have that back? Come back to life again. You don't go through a fire and say, oh, you know what? I put that in the fire a few minutes ago and it's burned up, but I've changed my mind. I'd like to get that back out of the fire right now if it's okay. No, it's permanent. And so he describes the love between these two, and he says, it's like the grave, it's like death, it's like fire, it doesn't give back. In other words, it's the final call. I made the decision the day that I got married that I was going to devote my life to you. And it's the final call. I had options before I was married. I had options to think about other people. But not now. Now I'm making this final commitment. And with that in mind, we back up to the first of that verse. And she uses the word seal. Now to us today, it surely has some meaning, but it may not have the strength of the meaning that it did to them. The idea was, she was saying to him, I want my seal upon your heart. I want my seal upon your arm. What was a seal? A seal was that showed protection. It had not been broken. And it showed ownership. Just the other day, and I meant to ask Tracy terminology on this and I forgot, so bear with me that I don't know the terms on this, okay? The other day I got a nice thank you note in the mail, and I say nice not only in that it was very kind in what was communicated, but it was nice in the fact that you could tell it was handmade in a very beautiful way. And I'm sure there's a term like scrapbooking, but this wasn't scrapbooking, this was a card. I don't know what you call that, okay? But whatever it was, you could tell someone had the proper tools and the proper supplies and all to make a very beautiful piece of stationery or a note card. As a matter of fact, this note card, where the envelope was sealed, they had a substance that they put over the seal, right the point of the envelope, and then they had an FHU bell tower emblem that they pressed into that seal. Now, I sat there and, of course, immediately thought, wow, that's our bell tower. This is really neat. And then I started opening it, and even before I got to that point, I thought, if I open this, I'm going to have to tear the seal. And I tore it down a little bit. I stared at it and said, that's really pretty. But I'm going to have to tear the seal. And I ripped between the seal. It's almost like a latex textured seal that tore it apart. You could go and look. It's still on the back of my desk there. You could look at it and immediately you would know someone's opened that. Whatever was private information, it's been broken now. Somebody has been aware of that. You could close it back and look and say, well, I see the emblem on it. Especially in the Old Testament times. What was a signet ring, a seal for? The king would have a ring, and it was his way of signature, and almost like having a notary also at the very same time, all in one motion. He would take and press that into it as it covered a document. The only way you could read that document would be to break the seal, and everyone would know that it was broken. So as long as it was sealed, it was protected. And as long as you would look at the seal, you would know, who is that? We don't have time right now to really slow down at this story. But you remember the story of Tamar and Judah? Remember she married Judah's oldest son. The oldest son died, and they didn't have children, and so she was given to the next son, and that was a strange situation. He didn't want to bear a child that the older brother would really be considered the offspring of, and so God didn't like how he handled that situation, and so God struck him dead. And so now we have this poor young woman, Tamar, She just wanted a husband and he died. She was given another husband and he died, and now she's barren, and she's supposed to wait for the third son, but you remember the third son was really young. And so Judah tells her, you're going to have to wait on Tamar, you're going to have to wait on Shelah. But it's going to be a while. So why don't you go back to your parents? I'll call you. He didn't call. Let that sink in, ladies. What do you want in life? I want to be loved. I want a husband. I want a baby. What's happening? I'm waiting. I see my friends. They're moving on in life. I'm waiting. What have you heard about Shelah? Oh, he's a man now. Well, why? I don't know why. She doesn't handle the situation as she should, but you remember what she did do. Not promoting it, what she did though. She covered herself like a harlot so she couldn't be recognized. She went and sat on the edge of a pathway that she knew that he was going to be traveling to have the sheep sheared. In the meantime, his wife had died. We see a lot of our fleshly nature in this story. We see how sometime in grief we do the wrong thing. We see how sometime our sexual appetite is not restrained. There's a lot in this story. And so in his loneliness, he makes the wrong call and he turns to this prostitute. They got to strike a deal, though. She's a prostitute. I'll give you a goat. Don't have it with me right now. And then you'd call it wisdom, even though what she's doing wasn't righteous. You'd call it wisdom if you want to trick somebody. And so you know what she asked for, remember? I want your seal. I want your signet. I want your cord, and I want your staff. Those were all personal. Now, she's going to give them back once he brings the goat. You know, it's just like when someone says, okay, I guess you can go, but you need to leave your driver's license. Except what she's saying is you need to leave your driver's license, your car, and your insurance card. Like she's taking it all. Well, after he leaves, they have their encounter, he leaves. Well, you can imagine, he quickly gets the goat back because she has his identity. And if that's lost in that day and time, all of your legal documents are no longer valid because you can't prove it's yours anymore. So he gets the goat back quickly, but the problem is he goes where the prostitute sits, but she's not there. He goes and asks around, hey, there's a prostitute that must regularly sit there because when I came by one day, she's there. And no, you're not from around here, are you? There's never been a prostitute sit there. No, really, there was a prostitute that sat there. I'm telling you, there's never a prostitute that sits there. 3 months goes by. They bring word to Judah. You know what your daughter-in-law's done? She's played the role of prostitute. And now she's pregnant. Another lesson of our human nature. Isn't it amazing how horrible sin looks on someone else and how innocent we make it look on ourselves? We can just overlook it when it's our own sin if we're not careful. And so here's the guy that had committed fornication, but you know what his answer is about Tamar? Immediately his answer is, bring her, have her burned to death. Tamar sends communication to him, says, I need to give you a fact and I need to ask you a question. The fact is this, and she sends the signet, the cord, and the staff. And says, I just need to let you know, whoever owns these things, because she kept herself hidden during that whole interlude, whoever owns these things is the father of this baby. And so the question is, do you happen to know who owns these things? He allowed her to live. And the offspring literally became the lineage of Jesus Christ. And she's mentioned in Matthew's account of Jesus' genealogy. What's the point? She knew the power of the seal. She knew if I can hang on to his signet, he will never be able to deny what he has done. I want you to hear, in that kind of culture, That is the kind of culture that Song of Solomon was written. And I want you to hear this young wife. And I want you to hear this simple plea to her husband. I want my seal to be on your heart. I want every woman that sees your heart to know it belongs to your wife. I want my seal to be on your arm. I want everybody you meet to know that your arms belong to me. I want to ask you, husband. I want to ask you, wife. Is it very clear to all of your co-workers that your heart is owned by your spouse? Is it very clear to all of your friends that your heart is owned by your spouse? Is it very clear in all of your actions that your arms, your life, your strength is owned by your spouse? I want to remind you that if we were going to put unfaithfulness, if we were going to put fornication on a timeline, and this is the beginning of the timeline, and the very act of fornication is here. I don't know how many couples have come to my office at that moment when their life is blown up because the other one has found out about the other one. And you always know when that phone call comes in, it starts like this. No small talk. Hey, David? Yes? Are you in the office? Are you in the office right now? Yes. Can me and my wife come over? Sure. Now? Sure. We'll be there in 5 minutes. You know what that's going to be. You know what it's going to be. And you know what oftentimes the guilty party will say? I don't know how it happened. I really don't know how it happened. And I'll say, well, let's just talk about it. Let's just talk about it. Tell me where it began. And you know what you'll find out usually? Usually you'll find out it began 2 years ago, 4 years ago, 6 years ago. It begins like this. Well, you know, we were just placed together on a project at work, and you know, we just became good friends, and that project was an 18-month project, and we really, the team did really well, and you know, there was that feeling of success. Wow, we did this together, and you know, I noticed then that I kind of liked him, or I noticed then I kind of liked her, but I didn't think there was anything to it, but you know, because our team was successful, they chose us for a second project. And so we started that next project, and it was a smaller team, and you know, we just started just the two of us going out to lunch. It was just professional. That's all it was. But then also I noticed that my husband really didn't talk to me anymore. But wow, he would listen to everything I said, and it wasn't intentional. It's just that we became really good friends because he would listen. And I don't know. You know, another couple of years went by, and I realized I don't really know my husband much anymore, but I know him really well, and I realized he's the one I love. And I don't really know how I got here, but this is where I am, and this is what's happened. I read a book one time. And honestly, the book was okay, but it wasn't that great. But you know what was really great about the book? The title. Running the Red Lights was the title. Stop running the red lights. Do you realize there are looks and stares that do not belong to anyone else except for your spouse? There are conversations that do not belong with anyone else except your spouse. There are moments of a touch that do not belong to anyone else except your spouse. And you know what? When we think about, well, how does fornication happen? How do we really just completely violate that vow of commitment? How do we just break it over fornication? We don't just break it here. There is a path that leads to fornication. And it'd be like getting on a parkway that has, or a busy street that has intersections with red lights. And we start out the first and we say, oh, it's not a big deal. And you run it. And you know what? It didn't seem like anybody got hurt. And so you stay on that path and you run the next one and you run the next one. You run 50 or 20 or 50 or 60 or 70 different red lights, and finally one day, things are destroyed. Wow, I never really thought about what this was going to do to my kids. I never really thought about what this was going to do to my reputation, integrity at work. I never really thought about what this was going to do to all the friends that I literally have built their friendships for years. I never really thought about what it was really going to do to our marriage. How did I get here? My arms and my heart no longer had the seal of my spouse. Finally, I'd like for you to quickly notice verse 7 and we'll close. Many waters cannot quench love, nor can the floods drown it. If a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, it would be utterly despised. We need to be inseparable. We need to be possessive. My spouse. But we also need to make sure that we don't become despised. This kind of language, we see it with two different subjects clearly in the Bible. You see what he's saying here? In the last, he's saying, okay, how beautiful is true love? You remember when you have the characteristics of love in 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. Remember, there's 15 characteristics there from 4 to verse 8. And the last one is, love never fails. And so he's talking about, and that's what we talked in Bible class. That's not talking about the emotion. That's talking about the commitment that says, I want to do what's right and best for someone. I'm going to do it sacrificially. I'm going to do it unconditionally. That kind of love never fails. In other words, there has never been one divorce ever where both parties were practicing agape. The only way you can have a divorce is at least one of the parties has to stop practicing agape love, because love never fails. It never violates the commitment and the covenant that is made. We fail love, but love never fails. And so that's why in the first part of this, he says, many waters can't quench it. You want to pour, like as if love is a fire. You want to pour enough water on it so that it's no longer burning? You can't do it. You want to treat it like a living organism. You want to drown it. You want to put it deep enough underwater that you're going to destroy it. He says, you can't drown love. Love is that powerful. There's hardly anything in our life more powerful than love. God is love. And so we say, so what he does is he notices, he closes here noting the exchange that sometimes we do. That's a horrible exchange. And I want you to notice again, it says at the end of verse 7, if a man would give for love all the wealth of his house, he'd be utterly despised. And so what he does is he talks about how powerful love is. And you say, well, it's so powerful, how do we fail sometimes? It's because we exchange things for love. We give it up. And he says, for example, what if someone comes in and says, hey, buddy, I know you got a wife, and I know right now she's got a seal on your heart and a seal on your arm, but could we make a deal? Well, what do you give me? I'll sell you my commitment to my wife for all the possessions of your house. You mean I'll be that rich? Give it to me. How many have chose career over spouse? How many have chosen fleshly lust over spouse? How many have chosen whatever it is over spouse? In other words, he's showing here and saying, it doesn't matter what you choose over your commitment, it'll be despised. It's a sorry, pitiful decision that you've made. And he clearly does that with two topics in Scripture. One is our commitment to our spouse right here, and the other is our commitment to the Lord with our soul. What shall it profit a man if he gains the whole world? Get those balances. Put one pan right here. You gain the whole world. What do you want in the world? You want a fancy car? Why not get the dealership and the manufacturer too? You get the whole world. You like nice clothes? Why not get the mall on top of it? Get the whole world. You want fleshly sin? You want vices? Get all the drugs you can get. Get all the sexual addiction fulfillments that you think you can find. What do you want? What's going to make you happy? Put the whole world on this pan right here. Now let's put it on the scale. Oh, what's going to be over here? Your soul. Put it right here. What's going to happen? Which one's going to weigh the most? Slam down. The soul is worth so much greater. What shall a man gain if he gains the whole world and loses his soul? What would he give in exchange? Because the day's coming where every one of us would give in exchange. We say, Lord, I made a terrible mistake. I wish I wouldn't have gained these things and lost my soul. And he's doing that very same thing here in this piece of poetry. He's saying, you mean to tell me you would make a commitment and enjoy that wonderful life of a loving commitment with your spouse? And you mean you would look over at this? Doesn't matter what the this is. You would look over at this, and you would exchange this for your commitment? As we close, I want you to think how powerful this commitment is. It's really what marriage is. I know in American culture, we tend to think that marriage is that big wedding day, and that's what marriage is. It's not. That's just a big event that we've made about a very important occasion, but you can have a marriage with nothing more than just a commitment to each other that God and that individual recognizes. Thornton Wilder said it this way: I didn't marry you because you were perfect. I married you because you gave me a promise. That promise made up for your faults, and the promise I gave you made up for mine. Two imperfect people got married, and it was the promise that made the marriage. And when our children were growing up, it wasn't a house that protected them, and it wasn't our love that protected them. It was that promise that protected them. This morning, if you're married, I beg you to go home this afternoon and slice out just 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes. To look your spouse in the eyes and you guys have a real simple conversation. I beg you to look at your spouse and say to them, my goal is for us to be inseparable. I know we're not perfect, and I know we may get on each other's nerves from time to time, but I want to walk through life with you. And I want that walk to be possessive. I want my heart to belong to you. I want my arms to belong to you. And I don't even want to start running one red light of anything that would violate that commitment. If you don't do this, I want to challenge you to do this in the future. I'm interrupting myself here. I'll come back to this in a minute. Will you pray every day, or at least regularly, for no one or nothing to come between you and your spouse? It's a good prayer to pray toward God. God, I don't want anybody or anything to come between my relationship with you, nor my relationship with my spouse. So go home, talk about what it means to be inseparable. Talk about what it means to be possessive. I'm jealous toward you. I want you to be mine, and I want to be yours. First and foremost, because that's what God wants. And I don't want to make foolish decisions. That one day on eternity, I would look back, on the day of judgment, I would look back and say, I despise that decision I made. Instead, I want us to have a relationship on this earth that will never be perfect. But at least we'll keep our promises. And we'll be committed. We're about to sing a song of encouragement. I want you also, as we sing this, to think about we're singing to each other, to encourage each other to make a commitment to God. Because if we gain the whole world and lose our own soul, what have we gained? To make a commitment to God, or to renew a commitment to God. And if there's anything we can help you with this morning that relates to your soul or relates to your family, there's not any of us here perfect. Let's all leave here being certain of our commitment to God. If you want to do that as you come forward, or there'll be a couple of elders in the library, if you want to pray and be counseled by them, the main thing is let's live life in the big view. Let's see the things that are really important. And let's honor the commitments that we make. And let's make the commitments that are godly. If we can help you in any way, come as we stand as we sing. Jesus, let us come to know you. Let us see you face to face. Touch us, hold us, use us.